So, Donald Trump just spoke for an hour and a half, claiming he did nothing wrong. Then the question looms, Mr. President, President Trump, if you did nothing wrong, why did you prevent any witness and any document from being allowed at the trial? If you're innocent, you'd be happy to have witnesses who were at the scene, documents that are evidence of what happened at the scene come forward. But the fact that Donald Trump spent months preventing any witness or any document from coming forward in first the House and then the Senate speaks far more loudly to the question, did Donald Trump do something wrong, than an hour and a half diatribe. The fact that Donald Trump wouldn't let witnesses and documents into the trial speaks far more loudly than his hour and a half long diatribe that was filled with mistruths and profanity. If he did nothing wrong, can you hear? Are you okay? Yeah. If he did, Mr. President, again, if you did nothing wrong, why just stop every witness? Why just stop every document? The bottom line is President Trump executed the largest cover-up since Watergate, and there will forever be an asterisk next to the president's name in the history books for two reasons. First, the cover-up orchestrated by the president and executed by Senate Republicans means his acquittal vote has no value. If it's a sham trial with not a witness or a document, then acquittal means nothing because there was no evidence and the defendant prevented the evidence from coming. A trial without witnesses, a trial without documents is not a trial. The overwhelming majority of Americans, Democrat, Republican, Independent, know that. And second, this was the first time in American history that there was a bipartisan vote to convict and remove a president from office. Democrats were united, even those who had a great difficulty because they came from such red states. But Mitt Romney had the courage to break ranks despite huge amounts of pressure. So many of our Republican colleagues probably knew that Donald Trump was wrong. But they know that there is a vindictive, angry president, as his hour-and-a-half speech showed, and they were fearful. And some of those colleagues said, well, the president will now never do it again. This speech proved that he will do it again because he's on his self-righteous horse saying he did nothing wrong. The president missed a historic opportunity to address the nation. Instead of self-victimizing and self-aggrandizing, instead of being spiteful and vindictive, President Trump could have used his nationally televised speech to show some contrition and unite the nation, as Presidents Nixon and Clinton, in each in his own way, tried to do. I wish for a moment he would discuss his plan to address the manufacturing recession. How are we going to pay for new infrastructure? How are we going to get the cost of drugs down? How are we going to address the resurgence of ISIS thanks to his reckless foreign policy? He didn't do that because for Donald Trump, it's all about Donald Trump and no one else. He was impeached for putting himself before the national interest. His speech showed that that's what he always does. I'll close by reading something Adam Schiff said in his closing arguments because it fits so perfectly. Here's what Schiff said. And if you know you can't trust this you can't trust this president to do right for this country. You can trust he will do what's right for Donald Trump. He will do it now. He's done it before. He'll do it in the next several months. And he'll do it in the election if he's allowed to. That is why, if you find him guilty, you must find that he should be removed. Because right matters, truth matters, otherwise we are lost. Donald Trump just proved Adam Schiff right. It's only about Donald Trump, not about the American people, and he'll try to repeat what he's done before once again. Questions on this subject?
reaction to the words that he used?
The profanity is so inappropriate for a man who talks about his faith and values. You don't do that before a national audience. Okay?
Senator, the question of witnesses and documents aside, the trial is over, but what's next for the Democratic Party if they seek to remove the office? What do you do?
Well, what we want to do is start talking about the things that matter to the American people, protecting American health care from sabotage, making sure that protections for pre-existing conditions remain so the insurance company can't cut you off if your kid has cancer. We want to make sure there's a big infrastructure bill to rebuild our infrastructure and create thousands, millions of good-paying jobs. We want to make sure our foreign policy is straightened out, that ISIS, which the experts are now saying is resurgent, is held into line. We want to focus on the substance. Donald Trump only likes to focus on Donald Trump.
What do you foresee for the presidential election in November?
I'm not going to get into that. Okay? Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your being here.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.